if you're able to, it'd be great if you could turn on your camera so we can see each other and be a little more interactive. Good morning. I'm just gonna share my screen, make sure it works. Okay. Can you see the slides okay? Okay, awesome. So if you have questions as we're going through or anything, please feel free to interrupt or throw them in the chat. Um, just by way of introduction, my name is Jessie. I'm an assistant professor of statistics at the University of Toronto. Before that, I worked at Verily, which is Google's life science company. And prior to that, I got my PhD with Tianqi, who I think you've met at Harvard. I did a postdoc at Stanford. So I've been working on data science for quite a long time. You'll also meet Aaron, I think tomorrow. Andy, you'll meet later today. Junwei, you'll meet later in the week, and Nitin as well. And Brian, you guys had a chance to meet. So today, the goal of the lecture is just to give you a conceptual introduction to data science, to really understand what data science is. The program is called Data Science in Action. So just as a warm-up, what do you guys actually think data science is, if you had to give a definition for it? You can put it in the chat too if you don't want to use your mic. Sorting through data, that's great. Anybody else? No wrong answers? Analyzing and compiling raw data, using data to make discoveries, innovate, those are all great. Yeah, exactly. So this is actually a quote from the first Journal of Data Science, which started about 20 years ago. And it's really exactly what you guys have mentioned is it's a science of anything to do with data. So that could mean collecting data, analyzing data, modeling data to answer some sort of question or application. And so you might wonder, if the first Journal of Data Science came out about 20 years ago, when did data science actually begin? So really the first use of the word data science was back in the 1960s. So this is before we had all of the large data sets we have today, before we had any of the computing power, by actually a statistician named John Tukey, who wrote a book called Exploratory Data Analysis, and was really the first person to say that analysis of data is truly a science. And this progressed into the 80s when Jeff Wu, who was the chair of statistics at University of Michigan, really used science for the first time in place of statistics. In the 90s, KDD, or the Knowledge Discovery Databases Workshop, which is a large data mining workshop, started out. A machine learning center at Carnegie Mellon, or CMU, began. And in the early 2000s, the sort of two cultures of data science that exist today, which are sort of this viewpoint of a statistician versus a computer scientist, which you'll get a taste of this week, was written about by Leo Breiman. Like we just saw, the Journal of Data Science was launched in the early 2000s, and following that, data just sort of exploded. Data are everywhere was a quote used by Science, which is a popular science venue. And I recently did a Google Scholar search just to see how many articles actually use the word data science as a keyword. So this is a smaller amount that actually exists, but 8 million articles just with a quick search, which is sort of insane considering that the first journal began only 20 years ago. And so why is data science so popular? Why are you guys sitting in a program called Data Science in Action? So really the reason why data science is so popular is because there is so much data. There are so many questions we can answer, so many applications we can consider. So that brings us to the next point of, what do we actually mean by data? There's so many types of data. So for instance, this, what's called the 2x2 table, is sort of the simplest type of data you can get. This is an example from a randomized controlled trial by a famous chemist called Linus Pauling, who became really obsessed with vitamin C and if it could cure a cold or not. So he randomized placebo versus vitamin C and then counted how many people got cold versus non-cold and recorded it in this 2x2 table. You can imagine that you might want to run many, many randomized controlled trials to get sort of a better sense of, does vitamin C help a cold or not? And this is an example of that. We have many estimates from a randomized controlled trial. We might want to combine them so we can have a better sense. Down here is an example of genetic data. So genomic data science is a huge area today, trying to understand if the genetic basis of disease and if we can actually develop targeted treatments to help patients have better outcomes. Questionnaire data is also really popular. So you can imagine in the COVID-19 pandemic, you might collect a survey to understand if people are willing to get a vaccine, what their views are, what are people's views on lockdowns, another type of data. Down here is location data. So actually looking at longitude and latitude coordinates of different people as they go through a city. So that's location data. This is all sorts of data about heart rate, temperature, accelerometer, so medical data about patients, and then it could be used, for instance, to understand how they respond to stress events. A really popular source of data nowadays is from social media. So for instance, Twitter data contained in free text. So that's a very popular data to analyze. And what you guys will see this week is actually image data. So this is an example of a medical image. And how might you infer something about someone's health from a medical image? So we live in a world now where there are many, many types of data, many types of questions we can answer. And so you might wonder how much data actually is there. So IDC is the International Data Corporation, and they try to get some estimate of how much data exists, which they've estimated as 18 zettabytes. That was in about 4 years ago, which is 1 trillion gigabytes, a huge, huge amount of data. And so you guys have grown up in a time where you're sort of surrounded by data. This might not be too surprising to you, but in just 1 minute, Twitter users send almost 500,000 tweets. Snapchat users share 2 million photos. Instagram users post 50,000 pictures, and LinkedIn got 120 new users just since, for instance, we started our lecture about a minute ago. Google search data is another form of data. So for instance, there's 40,000 searches in a second, 3.5 billion in a day. If you use Facebook, you're one of 1.5 billion people who do. If you have a smartphone, 2/3 of the world population have phones which all generate data each day as you use them.